Chapter 1 The New Archivist. Welcome back to Fascinating Horror, where history's steam still scalds the living. If the Vatican's buried secrets make you flinch, smash subscribe and drop a like. You'll want the full series when the doors seal shut. The first jet of 180 C holy water steam struck Sister Elena Rossi's left cheek at exactly 6:42 p.m. on October 12th, 2024.
It peeled the skin from her zygomatic arch to the angle of her jaw in a single, blistering ribbon, the flesh curling like ancient parchment under a flame. The pain arrived a fraction of a second later, a white-hot explosion that drowned every thought except one. Matteo. I'm sorry. 41 seconds earlier, she had been fully alive inside Il Purificatore, the Vatican's antique brass autoclave, her white gold wedding ring already beginning to fuse with the door's inner seal as the pressure built. Her veil, once crisp and starched from her Florence convent, now clung to her scalp like a second, boiling skin. This is not speculation. This is reconstructed from the Fabbrica di San Pietro's sealed incident report, declassified only after a 2025 archival fire, and from the single security camera feed that captured the muffled thumps from below St. Peter's Basilica. What follows is the sequence of events that led a newlywed archivist into a chamber designed for purification, but not for the living. Rewind 21 days. Sister Elena Rossi, 32 years old, eyes the color of Tuscan olive oil, a laugh that could coax confessions from stone stepped off the 6:12 a.m., Trenitalia from Florence on the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. The platform at Roma Termini smelled of espresso and diesel. But Elena carried a different scent. Orange blossoms. Faint remnants from the bouquet she had clutched exactly 3 weeks earlier at her wedding in the Basilica di Santa Croce. Her husband, Matteo Bellini, had kissed her goodbye with a grin wide enough to rival the Arno River. Trade catacombs for filing cabinets. Amore. He'd teased. Matteo was an archaeologist specializing in Etruscan necropolises. He spent his nights brushing dust from bones that had lain silent for millennia. Elena, a conservator with a doctorate in paleography from the University of Bologna, had always preferred the living word to the dead. The Vatican's summons changed that. The induction tour began before the tourists stirred. At 5:47 a.m., sharp, Monsignor Aldo Ricci met her at the Porta Sant'Anna gate, his black cassock buttoned to the throat, despite the mild October dawn that painted the cobblestones gold. Aldo was 68, thin as a breviary spine, with eyes that had catalogued more sins than most confessors heard in a lifetime. He smelled of frankincense layered over old paper and the sharper tang of photocopy toner from endless reproductions. They walked in silence across the Cortile della Pigna, the courtyard's massive bronze pine cone cast in the 2nd century AD and relocated here by papal whim casting a long, accusatory shadow that pointed like a compass needle toward the Belvedere Palace. Elena's sensible black shoes clicked against the basalt paving stones, each step echoing faintly as if the ground below were hollow. A discreet side door led to an elevator disguised as a service lift, brass cage gilded with faint Renaissance motifs. No floor indicators, just a single keyhole that Aldo turned with a skeleton key the length of her palm. The cage dropped smoothly, 30 meters in under 20 seconds, the air growing cooler with every passing floor. First the crispness of surface Rome, then the damp mineral breath of limestone that had never known direct sunlight. Finally a chill that seeped into bones like winter confession. The doors sighed open onto a corridor narrower than a monk's cell, lit by a single red bulb screwed into a porcelain socket.
The bulb pulsed at 60 beats per minute, exactly the resting heart rate of a woman on the edge of panic. Elena noted it subconsciously. Her pulse matched it by the time they reached the end. A heavy steel door, painted the deep crimson of cardinal robes, bore a brass plaque in raised letters, archivio segreto, Vaticano, sezione restauro, proibito l'accesso, senza autorizzazione papale. Aldo swiped a magnetic card modern security grafted onto ancient stone, and the lock clicked open with a sound like a tongue clucking in disapproval. Most of the secret archives are climate controlled on the upper levels, Aldo explained, his voice flat and economical, as if reading from a restricted memo. Temperature 18°C, humidity 45%, UV filtration to 0. But the fragments we deal with here, parchment predating Gutenberg, vellum from the scriptoria of Charlemagne's court, even sheets of human skin from the 11th century anti-plague rituals, they degrade under modern HVAC. Mold spores thrive, ink migrates. We use steam, controlled, sanctified. He gestured into the chamber. It was smaller than Elena had imagined from the briefing dossier, precisely 2 meters long by 1 meter wide by 2 meters high. A perfect cube of lead-lined walls to shield against cosmic rays that could mutate DNA in organic materials over centuries. The floor was a steel grate over a drainage trench that plunged into blackness. The kind of void that swallowed echoes, and rumor had it, the occasional dropped tool never to be seen again. Ventilation ducts, narrow slits, high in the walls, hummed softly, pulling air from the catacombs below and exhaling it toward the Sistine Chapel's exhaust systems far above. In the exact center stood the machine, Il Purificatore, built in 1892 by the Swiss firm Geberder Sulzer, the same engineers who supplied boilers for the Papal Mint and early submarines for the Italian Navy. It resembled a Victorian strongbox mated with a confessional booth. The body was riveted brass, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the red bulb in bloody distortions. Ribs of reinforcement ran vertically, etched with Latin invocations, so worn by decades of steam and polishing that they looked like scars. Exorcismus Deus omnis immundus spiritus. A door thick as a missile hinged on the left, sealed by a wheel lock the diameter of a communion plate. Above it, a cluster of gauges glowed soft amber, pressure in bars, temperature in Celsius, cycle timer in minutes and seconds. A small placard, laminated and trilingual, warned, "Entrare solo con autorizzazione papale," enter only with papal authorization. No exceptions. Elena's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of proximity to history. This was why she had left the convent's relative safety for the Vatican's depths, to touch the untouchable, to preserve what popes had hidden for centuries. Her first assignment arrived that afternoon in an acid-free box sealed with wax imprinted by the apostolic signatura. Inside, a single sheet of 14th century vellum, no larger than a postcard, bearing what paleographers called the bleeding psalm. The text was Psalm 51, but the margins held a gloss in a trembling hand, crimson ink that had begun to migrate, feathering outward like blood from a fresh wound. Scholars debated its meaning. One faction claimed it predicted the Great Schism and the Avignon papacy's fall in 1378. Another dismissed it as a monk's delirious fever dream during the Black Death. Either way, the migration threatened to erase the note entirely within months. Elena prepared methodically, nitrile gloves, powder-free, surgical mask that fogged with her breath, hairnet tucking every strand of her auburn bob beneath the veil. She opened Il Purificatore's door. The wheel spun with a silky whisper, and the interior revealed itself, mirror-bright stainless steel retrofitted in the 1950s, perforated trays on racks like library shelves, nozzles arrayed at every angle to ensure steam penetrated from all directions. The air inside carried a faint metallic tang mixed with myrrh, the holy water infused during blessing ceremonies in the basilica's crypt. She laid the vellum on the middle tray, centered precisely, stepped out, spun the wheel clockwise until the soft clack of the seal engaging, programmed the panel 121C 1.1 bar, 15 minutes standard for bacterial spores, prions, and the WHO's autoclave protocols adopted by the Vatican in 1998. The cycle initiated with a low hum, gauges climbing smoothly. At 6 p.m. sharp, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled across the city deep, resonant peals that vibrated through stone and bone alike. Elena was in the adjacent reading room, a cramped space with green banker's lamps and stacks of indices bound in red Morocco leather. She was cross-referencing the bleeding psalm against a 12th century psalter when she heard it, a second clack, fainter but unmistakable, echoing from the restoration chamber. She rose, heart skipping a beat. Not fear, she told herself, just curiosity, and returned to Il Purificatore. The wheel had rotated a precise quarter-inch counterclockwise. The pressure gauge read 3 bar idle, but not 0. The timer showed no cycle active. A quick check of the maintenance log clipped to the wall. Last entry. 14:30. Routine calibration by Swiss Guard technician. Nothing scheduled for evening. Thermal expansion. Elena rationalized. The underground temperatures fluctuated, with the basilica's heating systems above, metal contracts unevenly. Still, protocol demanded caution. From her pocket, she produced a splinter of olive wood blessed during Palm Sunday Mass in St. Peter's Square, a keepsake from her wedding day, when Matteo had slipped it into her bouquet as a joke about holy wedging. She jammed it firmly between the door lip and frame. It held snugly, a makeshift chalk, satisfied. She returned to her indices. That night, from their tiny apartment in Trastevere, overlooking the Tiber, Matteo called on FaceTime. The screen showed him in rumpled khakis, a half-eaten plate of carbonara beside his laptop. How was day 1 in the Pope's basement, Sister Bellini? Quiet, Elena replied, glancing over her shoulder at the hallway where the red bulb still pulsed down toward the archives entrance. Too quiet. The machine, it's like it breathes. Matteo laughed. Everything in Rome breathes history. Get some sleep. Love you more. October 8th dawned cooler, a crispness that hinted at autumn's arrival. A new package arrived via pneumatic tube from the upper archives, a strip of material no wider than a bookmark, pale and supple under the lamps. Human skin, tanned in the 11th century during the Gregorian Reform's anti-plague campaigns, inscribed with Coptic charms in iron gall ink mixed with lamb's blood. The delivering archivist, Father Lucas, a German Jesuit, with a face like carved ivory, refused to cross the restoration chamber's threshold. He set the sealed vial on the outer table and backed away, crossing himself 3 times in rapid succession. It remembers the sickness, he whispered, voice trembling, the dying, the prayers that failed. Elena donned double gloves, a full-face shield this time. Prion risk was theoretical but non-zero, Mad cow disease had taught the world caution with neural tissues. She loaded the skin strip onto a sterile quartz tray, non-reactive, UV transparent for post-cycle inspection, programmed prion kill, 134 C 3 bar, 18 minutes. The door sealed with its familiar clack. Cycle ran flawlessly when the timer hit 0 and the wheel unlocked. Elena opened the door. The interior LIDA LED strip installed in 2012 flickered once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. She blinked. The power breaker on the wall showed steady green, no surges logged, a glitch, perhaps. She retrieved the tray. The skin was pristine, charms sharp, but as she turned away, the light flickered again 3 times, and from the drain below the grate came a faint gurgle, as if something liquid had shifted in the pipes. October 10th brought routine, a batch of 15th century indulgence certificates, each promising reduced time in purgatory for a florin donated. Elena worked through lunch. The chamber's hum a constant companion. She began to notice patterns. The red bulb in the corridor pulsed faster when the basilica's organs practiced above vibrations traveling through stone. The ventilation ducts whispered Latin phrases during off hours, or so it seemed, echoes from tour groups, perhaps peccator, intravit. Sinner has entered. October 12th. An unseasonal heat wave gripped Rome 28C at midnight. Humidity thick as sacramental wine. Vatican budget cuts, whispered about in the cafeteria, had eliminated the night shift assistant. Elena was alone below, the upper world asleep under a full moon that silvered the dome of St. Peter's. She loaded a crate of Crusader-era documents, letters from the Fourth Crusade, parchment brittle as communion wafers, edges flaking like dry skin. Bending to adjust the lower tray, her veil, loosened by sweat, brushed the external pressure sensor, mounted innocently on the frame. The wheel spun on its own, not slowly, not hesitantly, with mechanical precision. Clockwise, sealing, suction kicked in from the ventilation shafts. A sudden downdraft triggered by the Sistine Chapel's evening choir rehearsal far above, hundreds of voices exhaling in unison, creating negative pressure that rippled through the ductwork like a sigh from the depths. The door slammed. Clack. The sound was final, tomb-like. Inside, the gauges leapt, 0 to 1 bar in 2 seconds, 2 bar in 4, temperature climbing past 100 C. A low hiss built to a serpent's roar as nozzles activated jets of steam sanctified with myrrh and holy water from the Jordan, heated to 180 C under pressure that could sterilize bone. Elena seized the internal wheel. There was none. No panic bar, no emergency release, no intercom microphone. Only the grated peephole at eye level, already fogging with condensation that smelled faintly of incense and scorched flesh. Outside, the corridor stretched empty, the red bulb throbbing like a warning heart. She pounded the glass with both fists, her wedding ring white gold, engraved Semper Fidelis in Matteo's handwriting, left crescent smears of blood where the skin of her knuckles split against the unyielding brass. The first jet struck her veil, soaking through cotton to scalp in an instant. Blisters bloomed. She screamed, the sound ricocheting off mirrored walls, swallowed by the machine's growing roar. The bells of St. Peter's tolled 6 p.m. above, their peals vibrating the structure, but reaching no human ears in the depths. No one was scheduled in Sezione Restauro after 5:30 p.m. Elena had 42 seconds before the cycle locked irreversibly. the door fusing under heat and pressure. In the control booth, one level up, an unmonitored room with dusty monitors and a coffee-stained keyboard, a single screen flickered to life. Green text on black, cyclus non programmatus, initiatum est. Unscheduled cycle, it has begun. The steam filled the chamber, white and merciless, carrying the faint scent of myrrh and something older plague pits, perhaps, or the breath of heretics long purified. Elena's last coherent thought, before pain erased language, if you hear this. Matteo, tell them the wood wasn't enough. Then the world became heat, pressure, and the endless hiss of sanctification. Chapter 2, Whispers in the Steam. The olive wood splinter endured precisely 4 nights after the initial sealing incident, its blessed grain holding against the subtle pressures that began to manifest in the restoration chamber. On the evening of October 16th, Elena Rossi returned to the Sezione Restauro at 11:47 p.m., the precise moment when the Swiss guards above executed their midnight shift change. Their halberds clacking against the marble floors in a ritual cadence that reverberated faintly through the ventilation ducts like distant thunder. The unseasonal heat wave had shattered 2 days prior. A sharp cold front swept down from the Alps, transforming the Tiber River into a slick ribbon of black glass under the moonlight, and the underground air now carried a biting chill that nipped at exposed skin, dropping the corridor temperature to 12 C. Elena's breath emerged in visible puffs, condensing on the lead-lined walls and trickling down in tiny rivulets that disappeared into the grated floor. The single red bulb in the corridor pulsed at a reduced rate 55 beats per minute now, as if the Vatican's subterranean heart had slowed in response to the surface world's wintry exhale. She clutched a stainless steel thermos of chamomile tea that Matteo had prepared that morning. His handwritten note folded neatly inside the lid. For the ghosts who prefer herbal remedies over espresso, ti amo sempre. M. The paper was already softening from the steam of her breath. The wooden wedge remained firmly lodged between the brass door lip and the frame of Il Purificatore, protruding like a stubborn thorn defying extraction, yet upon closer inspection, under the harsh glow of her headlamp, a compact LED model issued by the Fabbrica di San Pietro for low-light archival work. Elena noticed an alarming transformation. The brass surrounding the wedge had oxidized rapidly overnight, shifting from its usual golden sheen to a deep bruise-purple patina, the kind of discoloration typically seen in centuries-old artifacts exposed to sulfuric vapors or prolonged heat. She pressed a gloved fingertip to the metal. It registered 38 C, exactly human body temperature, warm enough to fog her nitrile glove, but not hot enough to burn. This defied logic. The chamber had been idle since October 12th. No cycles logged, and the ambient underground temperature should have kept everything cooler. Elena flipped open the maintenance binder chained to the wall, a thick ledger with entries dating back to 1956 and scribbled in her neat paleographer's script. Anomaly. Unexplained thermal bloom, localized to door seal. Wedge intact, no visible deformation. Ambient temp 12 C. Metal surface 38 C. No cycle executed since 1012 incident. Compounding her unease was the condition of the bleeding psalm vellum, retrieved post-sterilization on October 13th and quarantined in a nitrogen-flushed acrylic case upstairs for observation. It had developed a new artifact during transit back down, a faint handprint in the lower margin, palm approximately 16 centimeter across. Fingers splayed in a gesture of desperation or supplication. The print was rendered in crimson ink that matched the psalm's migrating gloss. But spectroscopic analysis, conducted in the Vatican's analytical laboratory using a portable Raman spectrometer calibrated for pigment identification, confirmed the presence of hemoglobin, iron, and trace bilirubin, human blood, fresh, with a degradation profile suggesting deposition within the last 48 hours. Elena's own blood type was O negative, the universal donor, a detail from her medical file required for all archival staff handling biohazards. She had not pricked herself, nor had any bleeding occurred during loading. The handprint was absent in pre-cycle photographs taken with the lab's macro lens. Father Lucas, the German Jesuit who had delivered the human skin strip earlier, refused even to glance at the case when Elena showed him the photos via tablet. "The psalm bleeds again," he muttered, his face paling to the color of parchment, backing away until his heels struck the corridor wall. Just like in 1348, during the Black Death, the margins weep for the unshriven. Elena sealed the vellum back into its case, the nitrogen hiss sounding unnervingly like the autoclave's idle purge. She scheduled a secondary sterilization, protocol-elevated parameters to eliminate any potential prion contamination or psychrometric anomalies. 134 C, 3-bar absolute pressure, 18-minute dwell time, followed by a 10-minute vacuum dry cycle. This was overkill for standard parchment, but aligned with CDC guidelines for transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. Adopted by the Vatican after a 2001 mad cow scare in Italian herds. She initiated the load at midnight. The chamber's interior illuminated by the retrofitted LED strips that cast a sterile white glow, reflecting off the mirrored steel in a way that made the space feel infinitely recursive, like staring into a hall of confessions. The quartz tray slid smoothly into the rack. She stepped back, spun the wheel lock clockwise until the magnetic seal engaged with its characteristic clack, a sound that now sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Reminiscent of coffin lids in Etruscan tombs Matteo had described, the external control panel beeped confirmation, parameters locked, safety interlocks green, cycle commencement in T-10 seconds. At 12:03 a.m., 3 minutes into the ramp-up phase, where pressure should have been building steadily to 1 bar. The ventilation ducts activated without prompt. It began subtly, a low susurrus, like wind through organ pipes. But the ducts were sealed systems, filtered through HEPA arrays to prevent contaminant ingress from the catacombs. Elena was in the adjacent reading room, a cramped alcove lined with green-shaded banker's lamps and stacks of indices bound in red Morocco leather, cross-referencing the bleeding psalm against a digitized 12th century psalter from the Abbey of Monte Cassino. She set down her thermos, the chamomile's floral steam mingling with the corridor's chill. The sound resolved into articulation, not random noise, not the distant hum of tourists or maintenance carts above. Words, Latin, articulated in a timbre that evoked dry autumn leaves scraping across tombstone gravel. Peccator intravit. The sinner has entered. Elena's heart stuttered. sinking involuntarily to the red bulb's decelerated pulse, now accelerating to 72 BPM as adrenaline surged. She rose slowly, the wooden chair scraping against the grate like bones in a crypt. The ducts spanned the entire corridor length, branching from the restoration chamber to the deeper catacomb levels excavated during Sixtus V's 16th century renovations, and upward to the Sistine Chapel's exhaust plenums. No choir rehearsal at this hour. The basilica's schedule logged the last practice ending at 8 p.m. She approached the chamber door on silent feet, her sensible black Oxfords muffled by the grate. The pressure gauge on the external panel read 8 bar higher than programmed for this phase, climbing erratically. A faint hiss emanated from the seal, not the normal purge, but a sibilant leak carrying the cloying sweetness of myrrh overlaid with a sharper, metallic tang iron, perhaps, or the ozone scent of blood exposed to extreme heat. The wooden wedge vibrated subtly, a low-frequency tremor that traveled through the brass into her fingertips when she touched it. The patina had spread further, forming a circumferential ring around the door like a garrote wire, the whisper repeated. Closer now, as if originating from inside the chamber itself. Peccator, redi, sinner, return. Elena's hand flew to her rosary, the ebony beads carved from olive wood in Bethlehem and blessed by Pope Francis during a 2023 audience clicking softly as she fingered the crucifix. She recited the Subtuum Praesidium, the oldest known Marian prayer, dating to the 3rd century Coptic papyrus, Subtuum Praesidium Confugimus, Sancta Dei Genitrix. We fly to thy protection, O Holy Mother of God. Her voice was steady at first, a conservator's precision, but cracked on the final Ora pro nobis, pray for us. The whispering ceased abruptly, as if silenced by the invocation. The wedge stabilized. The gauge settled at 1.1 bar, on track, but the damage was done. The patina ring had completed its circuit, encircling the door in a perfect halo of oxidation. October 17th dawned gray and drizzling, the Vatican gardens slick with rain that pattered against the leaded windows of the Apostolic Palace. Cardinal Giuseppe Lamberto summoned Elena not to the public audiences, but to a private study in the palace's eastern wing, a room paneled in dark walnut and overlooking lemon trees that shivered in the wind, their fruit glowing like tiny suns against the gloom. Lamberto was 75, emaciated from a lifetime of Lenten fasts, with eyes the hue of wet ash and hands veined like medieval manuscripts. He poured Vin Santo from a crystal decanter into thimble-sized glasses, the sweet wine's aroma cutting through the room's scent of beeswax polish and old leather. He wasted no time on pleasantries. The autoclave sits atop a plague pit, he stated flatly, sliding a manila folder across the mahogany desk. 1572, Pope Gregory XIII, in his zeal against the Protestant codices smuggled from Geneva, ordered a heretical scribe, Fra Bartolomeo di Siena, sealed alive inside a prototype steam chamber with the cursed manuscript. The intent, to purify both soul and text through sanctified vapor. The pit was a mass grave from the 1348 Black Death, bricked over during urban estates expansions. Il Purificatore inherited the foundation. Elena's Vin Santo remained untouched. The whispers, eminenza, psychoacoustics, Lamberto interrupted, though his fingers drummed a nervous tattoo on the desk, betraying the dismissal. The ducks amplify echoes from tour groups, maintenance, even the wind through the pine cone courtyard. Nothing supernatural. Yet he opened the folder, blueprints from the Fabbrica di San Pietro, dated 1892, stamped with the Sulzer firm's seal. The foundation schematic revealed a void directly beneath the chamber labeled Fossa Communis 1572 in faded ink, with dimensions noting capacity for 47 bodies, victims of a localized outbreak tied to the Council of Trent's deliberations. Lamberto closed the folder. You are forbidden from entering the chamber proper. Load via the external side port, only a 1963 retrofit after a technician's entrapment scare. Continue the restorations. The work is essential. Elena nodded, but her mind raced. That night, she complied partially. She processed a batch of 13th century papal bulls documents, granting indulgences for the Crusades through the side port, a sliding drawer mechanism that allowed tray insertion without opening the main door. The cycle completed without incident, gauges stable, no whispers. At 3:33 a.m., a timestamp not programmed into any protocol, falling outside standard prion or bacterial cycles, the external pressure gauge spiked violently to 4 bar. The door bulged outward with a metallic groan, brass plates warping like a ship's hull under torpedo impact. Superheated steam jetted from the seams in white plumes, sanctified water flash boiling upon contact with the 12C air, filling the corridor with vapor thick as Victorian pea soup. The scent was overwhelming: myrrh, scorched flesh, and the loamy rot of disturbed earth from a freshly opened grave. The wooden wedge exploded with a sharp crack, fragments embedding in the lead wall like shrapnel from a holy grenade. The ducks erupted in a roar, peccator intravit. The sinner has entered Elena, dozing fitfully in the on-call bunk, a narrow cot in a side alcove with a crucifix and a 1970s alarm clock jolted awake, heart slamming against ribs. She bolted barefoot into the corridor, nightgown clinging to sweat-damp skin despite the cold. The chamber door held but glowed cherry red along the edges, heat radiating in waves that blistered paint on the opposite wall. The bleeding psalm case, left on the external table for post-cycle inspection, now bore evolution. The original handprint had been joined by a second, overlapping, smaller child-sized, fingers delicate as a novice's. Elena seized the fire axe from its wall mount, a relic from the 1980s with a rubber-gripped handle. Her first swing rebounded with a clang, sparks showering like infernal fireworks. The second dented the brass deeply, steam hissing through the breach in a scalding jet that struck her left forearm. Blisters erupted instantly, skin bubbling like parchment over flame. The whisper evolved, no longer ductal, but intracranial. A voice inside her skull, soft as a lover's. Elena, ready. Elena, returned. Terror propelled her upward. She burst into the Swiss Guard barracks at 3:47 a.m. Burns weeping clear fluid, eyes wide with primal fear. Captain Meyer, a burly Swiss with a mustache like a halberd blade, took one look and radioed for medical. The pit, Elena gasped, collapsing against a pillar. It's awake. The scribe, he's calling me back. Meyer summoned Lamberto via emergency channel. The cardinal arrived within minutes, disheveled in silk pajamas and a scarlet zucchetto, face ashen. He ordered an immediate shutdown, power cut. Chamber sealed with a portable arc welder from the Fabrica's toolkit. Psychological manifestation from stress, he declared to the guards, voice brooking no argument. Sister Rosie will be evaluated and rested, but before the weld cooled, Elena, escorted to the clinic, insisted on downloading the digital log via a tablet link. The file revealed an unauthorized trigger, IP address to 10.0.0.13, routed from the Apostolic Palace's private server. Lamberto's office subnet, October 18th. Elena self-discharged from the Ospedale Pediatrico Bambino Gesse's Vatican Annex. Against the burn specialist's protests, her forearm was swathed in silver sulfadiazine gauze that reeked of sulfur and antibiotics. Matteo met her at the Trastevere apartment, face etched with worry lines deeper than any Etruscan furrow. "This ends now," he said, packing her valise. "We're going home to Florence." "I can't," Elena whispered, unwrapping the bandage to reveal blisters forming perfect Latin letters, ready: "The codex has my blood, the pit has my name." That night, defying orders, she returned alone under cover of a maintenance blackout. The weld held firm, a jagged scar of molten brass, but the door wept condensation in rivulets that pooled on the grate, forming words in flawless cursive: "Elena ready, Elena return." She pressed her palm to the metal. It was ice cold, forest sea frost forming under her touch. From the drain beneath the grate emanated a new auditory horror: scratching, fingernails on metal, slow and deliberate, the rhythm of something long buried, excavating its way upward. Scritch, scritch, scritch. In the control booth above, abandoned since the weld, the unmonitored CCTV feed activated spontaneously. The screen displayed the chamber interior, steam coalescing into a humanoid silhouette, hooded like a 16th century monk, hands pressed against the inner door in mirror image to Elena's burns blisters, splits, exact, the cycle timer, offline, reset itself, go 3:33, countdown initiated, the scratching intensified, sinking to the seconds. Chapter 3, The Cardinal's Warning. The frost on the brass door did not melt under Elena's palm. Instead, it spread, crystalline veins racing outward like frostbite on living skin, etching the words, "Elena ready," in jagged script that cracked and bled tiny droplets of condensation, tinged rust-red blood diluted in holy water, seeping from micro fissures in the metal as if the autoclave itself were hemorrhaging. The temperature plummeted further, the digital thermometer on the wall plummeting to 2°C in seconds, breath crystallizing in the air into razor-sharp flakes that sliced the inside of Elena's nostrils when she inhaled. The scratching from the drain escalated into a frantic clawing, nails, human nails, yellowed and split from centuries of decay gouging metal, with a sound like teeth on bone, wet and grinding, accompanied by a low gurgling exhale that bubbled up through the grate, phlegm thick, plague rattled, the death rattle of lungs drowned in black bile. Elena recoiled, her bandaged forearm throbbing where the steam had kissed it, blisters now bursting open in synchronized pops, pus oozing in viscous strings that froze mid-drip into icicle stalactites dangling from her gauze like macabre ornaments. The pain was exquisite, a symphony of fire and ice warring beneath her skin, but she couldn't tear her gaze from the CCTV feed in the control booth. The hooded silhouette inside the chamber had moved, No longer a passive swirl of vapor, it pressed its face, what face? Against the inner peephole. A pallid oval smeared with soot and suppuration, eyes sunken pits leaking black ichor that trailed down the glass in sluggish rivulets. Pooling at the bottom were maggots impossible. In a sealed 180°C environment, writhed in the condensate, fat and translucent, burrowing into the brass seams as if feasting on the metal's soul. The countdown ticked. Go 003, 12. Captain Meyer burst into the corridor at 3:50 a.m., halberd in one hand, flashlight in the other, the beam cutting through the vapor like a scalpel through necrotic tissue. His mustache bristled with frost, his breath plumed in panicked bursts. Sister, step back, the weld. But his words choked off as the scratching ceased abruptly, replaced by a wet thump from below the grate, something heavy impacting the underside. Once, twice, the force denting the steel mesh upward in bulging deformities that resembled a skull pushing through coffin lid. Meyer's flashlight illuminated the drain, a hand skeletal, skin sloughing in putrid sheets, fingers elongated and jointed wrong, tipped with nails curled like scythes emerged clawing. Grasping at the grate's edges, tendons snapping like overwound harp strings as it hauled a forearm through. Bones splintering audibly with a crack that echoed like breaking vertebrae. Elena screamed, the sound raw and animal, tearing from her throat as blood sprayed from her burst blisters in arterial arcs that flash froze into crimson icicles shattering on the floor. Meyer swung the halberd. The blade severed the hand at the wrist in a spray of black fluid that hissed upon contact with air, evaporating into acrid smoke that smelled of gangrene and frankincense. The stump retracted with a sucking slurp, but the severed hand twitched on the grate, fingers spidering independently, crawling toward Elena's feet like a necrotic tarantula, leaving trails of viscous slime that corroded the metal, pitting it with bubbling lesions. Cardinal Lambertonau! Meyer bellowed into his radio, voice cracking as the door's frost cracked open in hairline fractures. Steam, no, not steam. Breath exhaling from within, fetid and hot, carrying flecks of decayed lung tissue that splattered the walls like phlegm from a consumptive's cough. The silhouette on the feed smiled, lips peeling back to reveal gums receded over teeth, filed to points. A tongue bifurcated, worm-like lolling out to lap at the peephole glass. Lamberto arrived at 4:02 a.m., flanked by two exorcists in plain clothes, Father Domenico and Sister Chiara, both pale as corpses, clutching vials of Jordan water and a relic bone from Saint Sebastian. The cardinal's eyes widened at the carnage, the crawling hand now pinned under Meyer's boot, still flexing, fingers digging into leather sole with enough force to draw blood that froze instantly. The scribe, Lamberto whispered, voice trembling like parchment in wind. Fra Bartolomeo de Siena, condemned 1572 for annotating a forbidden apocalypse codex with blood prophecies. Gregory V had him steamed alive and the prototype body dissolved, soul bound to the pit, the autoclave. It's his reliquary. He thrust a yellowed document at Elena Papal Bull, wax seal cracked, ink faded to sepia, exorcismus et purificamus per vaporum sanctum. We exorcise and purify through holy steam. The margins bore Bartolomeo's hand, sketches of the chamber, a figure trapped, skin boiling off in layers, eyes melting into sockets that stared eternally accusing. The countdown, 0001:45. The door buckled inward suddenly, a concussive force from within sucking air through the fractures with a vacuum roar that popped eardrums. Myers' left burst in a spray of blood. From the peephole erupted a geyser of boiling ichor, black and chunky with bone fragments, striking Kiara full in the face. Her scream was brief, skin sloughed from cheeks in melting sheets, exposing muscle that twitched and steamed, eyes liquefying into runny yolks dripping down her habit. She collapsed, convulsing, flesh bubbling like lard in a cauldron. Domenico hurled holy water. It flash-boiled on contact, vaporizing into a shriek that wasn't human Bartolomeo's voice, multi-layered. A chorus of the pit's 47 damned, Peccatrix intravit, ready at me, sinner woman has entered, return to me. Elena's vision tunneled, burns igniting anew as adrenaline surged. The severed hand latched onto her ankle, nails piercing calf muscle, injecting a cold necrosis that spread upward in veiny black webs, flesh putrefying in real time, maggots hatching from blisters and burrowing inward with audible crunches. She hacked at it with the fire axe Meyer dropped, blade severing tendons that spurted pus like overripe fruit. Lamberto grabbed her collar, dragging her back as the door's welds glowed white-hot, melting in rivulets of molten brass that pooled on the grate, hissing and solidifying into barbed wire coils. The codex, he wants the codex. The Voynich fragment you sterilized, it's the key. The countdown hit 00:30. The grate exploded upward, a skeletal torso erupting from the drained Bartolomeo's remains, fused with steam pipes, ribs splayed open like an iron maiden, heart a pulsating mass of corroded valves, leaking scalding bile. It lunged, jaws unhinging with a wet pop, teeth gnashing for Elena's throat. Meyer fired his sidearm standard issue Glock bullets, punching through decayed flesh that knitted back instantly, maggots swarming the wounds. Domenico chanted the rite of exorcism, voice rising over the cacophony. But the entity laughed, a sound of boiling phlegm and cracking bone. Lamberto shoved the papal bull into Elena's hands. Burn it. In the chamber complete the purification. The door ripped open from inside, hinges shearing in showers of sparks, revealing the chamber's interior, a hellscape of swirling, superheated vapor laced with flayed skin strips floating like confetti. The Voynich fragment retrieved earlier, now animated, pages flipping in blood wind, illustrations of plants morphing into screaming faces. Bartolomeo's torso dragged itself fully out, lower half a tangle of pipes and entrails, steam jetting from orifices like demonic propulsion. It reached for Elena, fingers elongating into tendrils that wrapped her waist, scalding through nightgown, branding flesh with Latin sigils that burrowed under skin. She screamed, axe swinging wildly, severing a tendril that writhed on the floor like a decapitated serpent, spraying acid blood that ate through the grate. Lamberto activated the emergency override, a hidden panel slamming the door mechanism. The brass slammed shut on the entity's arm, severing it in a guillotine crunch, black blood gushing in pressurized arcs that flash froze into obsidian shards, embedding in walls. The countdown froze at 00:01. Silence descended, broken only by dripping fluids and Chiara's gurgling death throes. Lamberto, face slick with sweat and ichor. whispered, "It's not over. The pit connects to the catacombs. Deeper. The full codex is there, sealed behind a door marked Non Apparius. He wants you to open it." Elena's burns now spelled apory across her chest. Open. From the sealed door came a new sound, knocking, slow, insistent, from inside the brass. Knock, knock, as if something on the other side politely requested entry. Chapter 4. Trapped in Sanctified Steam. The knocking ceased at 4:17 a.m. But the silence that followed was worse, a vacuum of sound that pressed against eardrums like cotton soaked in embalming fluid, amplifying every internal horror, the wet squish of Elena's blisters shifting under gauze, the crackle of frost reforming on the severed tendril still twitching on the grate, its cross-section revealing not bone, but braided steam pipes fused with calcified sinew, pulsing with residual pressure that forced black bile to ooze in rhythmic spurts, each droplet hitting the floor with a hiss as it flash-boiled the metal into pockmarked craters. Elena's calf, where the necrotic hand had latched, had begun to bloat, skin stretching translucent over veins that darkened to ink black, branching like root rot under glass, the tissue beneath liquefying into a slurry that sloshed audibly with every step, her leg swelling to twice its girth, seams of flesh splitting open in vertical gashes that wept a mixture of pus, blood, and tiny wriggling larvae maggots hatched from the entity's injection, burrowing deeper with peristaltic crunches, chewing through muscle fibers that snapped like overcooked pasta, exposing glistening tendons that twitched involuntarily, marionette strings severed from a dying puppeteer. Meyer hauled her backward, his boot slipping in the viscous pool of Kiara's facial melt her cheeks, now slumped in gelatinous folds over her collarbone. Eye sockets, empty craters bubbling with vitreous humor that had boiled and burst. The optic nerves dangling like overcooked noodles, still quivering with phantom signals. Domenico retched, vomiting a stream of bile laced with undigested host particles from earlier mass, the acid mixing with the ichor to create a foaming slurry that ate through his cassock, exposing abdominal skin that blistered instantly, bubbles rising and popping in rapid succession, each rupture releasing a puff of steam from subcutaneous fat rendering like lard. Lamberto, face a mask of splattered gore chunks of Bartolomeo's decayed lung tissue clinging to his zucchetto like leeches, slammed the emergency quarantine protocol, magnetic locks engaging with a thunk that vibrated through the floor, sealing the corridor in segmented blast doors that irised shut like camera apertures, trapping the five of them: Elena, Meyer, Domenico, Lamberto, and Chiara's convulsing form in the restoration antechamber. Red emergency strobes activated, bathing everything in arterial light, shadows dancing like flayed skins. "We can't leave her," Domenico gasped, kneeling beside Chiara, but her body arched in a final spasm, spine cracking audibly as vertebrae dislocated from boiling synovial fluid, her jaw unhinging with a wet pop, tongue swelling to fill the oral cavity, protruding purple and veined, splitting lengthwise as pressure built, blood vessels bursting in fireworks of crimson spray that painted the walls in Rorschach patterns of agony. Elena collapsed against the wall, her bloated leg giving way with a squelch, the skin finally rupturing in a catastrophic burst gallons of purulent fluid gushing out in a hot torrent, carrying with it a swarm of maggots that spilled across the grate. Some fat and engorged, others newly hatched and translucent, wriggling toward the drain where Bartolomeo's stump had retracted. The exposed muscle of her calf was a raw, quivering mass, fibers contracting in fasciculations that peeled layers away like onion skin, revealing the tibia bone beneath, etched with acid burns that fizzed and smoked, marrow visible as a pinkish foam bubbling from microcracks. Amputation now, Meyer barked, drawing his combat knife. But Lamberto stayed his hand. No, the infection, it's not bacterial. It's him, Bartolomeo, binding to her flesh. He tore open Elena's nightgown sleeve, revealing her scalded forearm. The blisters had coalesced into a single suppurating sac, skin parchment thin, beneath which something moved, not maggots, but tendrils, thin as capillaries but writhing like nematodes, burrowing under the dermis, mapping her vascular system in glowing Latin script that pulsed with each heartbeat. Peccatrix, intravit. Elena screamed as the tendrils reached her elbow, bifurcating into her biceps, muscle bellies inflating like balloons filled with scalding water, seams splitting to extrude loops of intestine. No, not intestine, steam hoses from the entity's anatomy, pale and veined, pushing through her flesh from inside out, coiling around her humerus with a squish that forced bone fragments to protrude through skin in jagged spikes. Blood jetted in pressurized arcs, but it wasn't red-black, thick as tar, carrying flecks of brass filings that embedded in the walls like shrapnel. The chamber door, resealed but compromised, began to sweat from the inside, condensation beating on the outer surface, but the droplets were viscous, stringy, stretching like albumin before detaching and splattering with plops, each impact corroding the floor grate further, holes widening to reveal the pit below, a yawning blackness exhaling fetid breath that carried the stench of 47 decomposing bodies, skin sloughing in sheets, organs liquefied into soup centuries ago but somehow stirring, a churn of maggoty sludge rising like a tide. Domenico, face blistered from proximity splashback, began the major exorcism, Latin spilling from cracked lips, exorcizo te, immundissim spiritus. But his voice faltered as his own abdomen distended, cassock tenting outward, buttons popping one by one to reveal skin stretching impossibly, translucent over a burgeoning mass. Bartolomeo's influence metastasizing, a parasitic gestation with a horrific rip. His belly burst open in a vertical cesarean without knife, entrails spilling in steaming ropes, but not his alien organs, brass-valved hearts and pipe lungs, flopping wetly, still beating, hoses seeking connection to the ventilation ducts. Meyer fired his Glock into the mass bang-bang-bang bullets, punching through with wet thunks, exiting in sprays of hydraulic fluid that scalded his face, skin peeling in strips that hung like party streamers. He dropped the weapon, clawing at his eyes as corneas clouded and ruptured, vitreous humor leaking down cheeks in milky tears. Lamberto dragged Elena toward the side port, the external loading drawer, her only salvation. The Voynich fragment inside, it must complete the cycle with you. He shoved the nitrogen case through the slot, but Elena's mutated arm, now elongated, joints reversing with cracks of ligament, tearing lashed out involuntarily, tendrils whipping to ensnare his wrist, injecting necrosis that spread up his arm in seconds, flesh blackening and sloughing to reveal bone that crumbled to dust. His hand detaching with a snap, falling to the floor where maggots swarmed it instantly, reducing it to skeleton in minutes. The blast doors groaned, pressure building from the chamber side, welds failing one by one in showers of molten sparks that ignited clothing, Domenico's cassock flaring up, fat rendering to fuel the flames. His screams muffled as lungs filled with boiling phlegm. Elena, half conscious, felt her torso inflate, ribs spreading with audible pops as internal pressure mounted, skin splitting along the sternum in a Y incision without scalpel, exposing her heart beating frantically. But valves replaced by brass fittings, steam hissing from coronary arteries, her lungs filled with sanctified vapor from within, expanding like overinflated balloons, alveoli bursting in chain reactions that forced blood foam from her mouth in pink bubbles that popped with wet smacks. Meyer, blind and burning, activated the final protocol, manual override to flood the antechamber with halon gas. But the system backfired pipes ruptured by the entity, releasing not suppressant but superheated steam from Il Purificatore itself. Jets erupting from wall nozzles at 200 C, striking flesh with the force of pressure washers. Elena's skin cooked from the outside now, epidermis separating from dermis in full-thickness sheets that peeled away in steaming flaps, revealing raw subcutaneous fat that melted and dripped like candle wax, pooling around her in sizzling puddles, muscle exposed contracted in tetanic spasms, fibers shortening and thickening until bones shattered under tension femur snapping with a crack like green wood in fire, shards piercing through quadriceps in bloody protrusions. Chiara's corpse, forgotten, stirred, Bartolomeo puppeteering the remains, melted face reforming into a grotesque mask, jaw reattaching backward, eyes regenerating as boiling orbs that fixated on Elena with pupilless hate. Lamberto, one-handed, forced the side port open wider, shoving Elena's head and shoulders into the loading drawer the only way in without opening the main door. Complete it. Purify with your blood. Her bloated, mutating body wedged halfway, hips catching, but pressure from behind Domenico's exploding torso providing the push shoved her through with a schlorp of displacing organs. Her lower half severing at the waist in the guillotine slot, intestines spilling in steaming coils that the drawer crushed into paste. Inside the chamber, hell manifest. The Voynich fragment hovered midair, pages splayed, illustrations animating plants with human faces screaming, roots burrowing into Elena's severed torso as it slid onto the tray, tendrils from the pages latching into her exposed spinal cord, injecting ink that spread through nerves like liquid fire, her remaining body arching in electroconvulsive seizures, vertebrae popping out of alignment, one by one in a zipper of cracks. The main door slammed shut from outside, Lamberto's final act, his detached hand somehow triggering the wheel. Clack. Cycle initiated, unscheduled, it's still eternal, gauges maxed. Steam filled the space, but now laced with Elena's evaporating fluids, blood vaporizing into red mist, fat rendering to greasy fog, bone marrow boiling out in yellow plumes. Her screams echoed, muffled by brass, as skin fully degloved in a single sheet, floating like a deflated balloon, eyes melting into sockets that stared eternally at the peephole. Outside, the antechamber fell silent, bodies reduced to steaming skeletons, flesh sloughed completely, maggots feasting on remnants. The log updated, cycle complete, purification achieved. Subject, Elena Rossi. Status, integrated from the drain. No more scratching, only a satisfied gurgle, as if the pit had fed. Chapter 5. The Failed Rescue. The cycle did not end with the clack of the door sealing Elena inside. It amplified, the chamber transforming into a pressure cooker of sanctified torment where time dilated into an eternity of flesh, unraveling thread by thread, cell by cell, the brass walls themselves seeming to inhale her agony, absorbing the vaporized essence of her screams into etchings that deepened the exorcism runes, turning Latin invocations into writhing serpents of condensed blood and bile. Outside, in the antechamber, now a charnel house of sloughed skins and boiling skeletons, Matteo Bellini arrived at 4:29 a.m., summoned by a frantic Swiss Guard pager alert that pierced the Trastevere apartment like a stiletto code black, sezione restauro, spouse notified. He had been dreaming of Etruscan tombs, Elena's laughter echoing in sunlit chambers, but awoke to the pager's vibration on the nightstand, screen glowing with the emergency code that no Vatican employee ever wanted to see. Matteo burst through the Porta Sant'Anna at 4:31 a.m., disheveled in jeans and a rumpled archaeologist's vest still dusted with Umbrian soil from a late dig report, his face a mask of primal dread as Captain Meyer eyes milky cataracts from burst corneas, skin hanging in charred strips from halon steam backlash met him at the elevator cage. "She's inside," Meyer rasped, voice a gravelly wheeze through scalded vocal cords that flapped loosely like wet leather, blood bubbling with each syllable. The door, it took her, half of her. He gestured with a hand missing 3 fingers, stumps cauterized black, bone ends protruding like snapped chalk. The blast doors irised open with a hydraulic groan that sounded like a dying beast, revealing the antechamber's horrors in strobing red light. Lamberto's one-armed corpse slumped against the wall, his detached hand fused to the override panel by molten brass that had cooled into a grotesque sculpture. Fingers still twitching in residual nerve fire, Domenico's eviscerated torso, abdominal cavity, a hollowed crater where alien organs had burst forth and deflated like punctured bladders. Intestines coiled on the floor in steaming loops now infested with maggots that had grown to thumb size in minutes, burrowing in and out of the tissue with crunches that echoed like popcorn in a microwave. Chiara's remains, a melted wax figure, facial structure collapsed into a puddle of liquefied features, teeth scattered like dice in the congealed fat pool. Matteo retched, bile surging but swallowed back, his archaeologist's mind cataloging the scene as a mass grave excavation gone wrong, flesh layers stratified by heat, top epidermis flash charred to carbon flakes, dermis below gelatinized and sliding off in translucent sheets that revealed subcutaneous fat rendered to yellow oil, sizzling faintly on the grate. "Elena," he bellowed, voice cracking, lunging toward the chamber door where muffled thumps emanated wet, rhythmic, like a heart beating inside a drum of brass. The door was warped, bulged inward from internal pressure, Surface a nightmare canvas. Elena's degloved skin sheet adhered to the outer brass via condensed steam, stretched taut like a drumhead. Facial features, faintly imprinted eyes wide in eternal scream, mouth agape, veins mapped in frozen blood that pulsed faintly as if the skin still lived, capillaries refilling with whatever fluid now coursed through the entity's hybrid system. Matteo pressed his palm to it. The skin was warm, 45°C, and contracted under touch, muscles beneath twitching in response. A flap of cheek peeling away to reveal the brass underneath, pitted with acid etches. Mire, bandaged hastily with strips torn from his uniform gauze, already soaking through with serosanguinous fluid, activated the external viewer. A reinforced porthole with thermal imaging. The feed revealed hell. Elena's lower torso severed at the waist by the loading drawer guillotine. Intestines extruded in crushed paste that smeared the tray, but regenerating tendrils from the Voynich fragment weaving into the wound. Plant root illustrations animating to burrow into mesenteric arteries. Injecting chlorophyll green sap that spread through her vasculature. Veins bulging green and throbbing, skin splitting to extrude vine-like protrusions that flowered with tiny screaming faces, petals peeling back to reveal tooth-lined maws. Her upper body, wedged on the rack, was a bloated horror, ribs splayed open from internal pressure, sternum cracked like a wishbone, heart exposed and enlarged, valves replaced by brass fittings, hissing steam with each beat. Coronary arteries rerouted through pipe elbows that leaked sanctified water mixed with blood. The fluid boiling in the vessels. Bubbles rising and bursting in micro-explosions that shredded cardiac muscle fiber by fiber. Lungs inflated to bursting. Alveoli distended like grapes ready to pop. Surface weeping serous fluid that vaporized instantly in the 200°C environment. Matteo pounded the door, fists bloodying against brass. Elena, I'm here, fight it. But her head lolled toward the peephole, neck elongated unnaturally, vertebrae protruding through skin in a ladder of knobs, eyes. Her eyes were gone, sockets filled with swirling steam that condensed into tear-like droplets of myrrh-scented oil, dripping down cheeks that had reformed partially from Voynich tissue bark-like texture, leaves unfurling from lash lines. The Swiss Guards mobilized, a rapid response team of 6, equipped with hydraulic jaws of life, thermal lances, and exorcism kit's vials of chrism oil, relics of St. Peter. They arrived at 4:42 a.m., the operation commencing in a frenzy of coordinated chaos. Nearly 50 personnel in total flooding the lower levels. Dozens of vehicles topside fire tenders from the Vigili del Fuoco. Ambulances idling with lights strobing across the Cortile della Pina. The air filled with the whine of generators, the clang of tools, shouts in Italian, German, Latin. First attempt. Hydraulic spreaders on the door hinges. The jaws bit into brass. Pressure building to 700 bar, but the metal resisted. Deforming, then rebounding with elastic force, snapping a piston rod that whipped back to impale a guard's thigh. Arteries severed in a fountain of blood that steamed on contact with the hot door. The wound cauterizing even as it bled. Flesh fusing around the metal shard in a gruesome weld. Thermal lance next. Oxyacetylene torch, cutting at 3,500°C. Blue flame slicing a seam. But the cut healed behind it. brass flowing like mercury to reseal, droplets leaping off to strike rescuers, one globule hitting a technician's neck, burrowing through skin like acid, tunneling down to the carotid where it solidified, blocking flow. The man clutched his throat, face purpling, eyes bulging as brain starved, collapsing in convulsions, foam flecked with brass particles bubbling from mouth. Matteo donned a heat-resistant suit borrowed from the Fabrica's welding bay, aluminized fabric rated to 1000 C, and forced his way to the front. "She's my wife, let me." He peered through a fresh cut. Elena's arm reached toward the peephole, but the limb was wrong elongated to 2 meters, joints hyperextended, skin split along the ulna to reveal bone replaced by steam pipe, pistons pumping with hydraulic rhythm, fingers fusing into a single claw that scraped the inner glass, nails shedding in layers to reveal brass underneath. Scraping Elena, Matteo, ready, into the condensation. A guard forced a fiber optic camera through a drill hole. The feed showed the Voynich fragment fully integrated pages fused to Elena's spinal column. Illustrations alive, roots penetrating vertebrae, siphoning marrow to fuel growth. Her nervous system rewired with ink veins that conducted not electricity, but commands. Body jerking in puppet spasms as Bartolomeo asserted control. Extraction attempt, robotic arm inserted via the side port. Grippers clamping Elena's remaining torso. Pull initiated, but her body anchored. Voynich roots burrowing into the chamber floor, cracking steel grate, delving into the pit below where skeletal hands, the 47 plague victims, rose to grasp, fingers intertwining with roots in a macabre braid, pulling her deeper. The chamber pressure spiked at 10 bar, door bulging outward, seams splitting to jet steam lances that struck the team, one jet piercing a guard's abdomen, exiting through back in a core of vaporized organs. Intestines steaming out like cooked noodles, another scalding Matteo's suit, fabric holding but heat conducting to skin beneath. Blisters rising in waves across his chest, popping in symphony, pus mixing with sweat. 6 hours. 200 personnel rotated in shifts. Heat exhaustion claiming dozens rescuers hospitalized with hyperthermia. IV fluids dripping into veins collapsed from dehydration. Matteo refused relief, and his hands raw from prying, nails splitting to the quick, blood mixing with brass filings that embedded under cuticles, infection setting in with green pus. At 10:42 a.m., breakthrough, a diamond-tipped core drill bored a viewing port. Elena's face pressed against it, but not Elena's. Skin bark-textured, eyes compound like insects, faceted with Voynich glyphs, mouth a maw of thorn teeth, tongue of vine lashing the glass. She spoke, voice a chorus through the steam vents. Matteo, join purification. The drill port erupted, a geyser of blood sap mixture engulfing Matteo, coating his visor, seeping through seals to scald his face epidermis, lifting in sheets. Nose cartilage melting, lips fusing in a permanent scream. Guards pulled him back as the door finally yielded to cumulative damage, hinges shearing, but inside, empty rack. Elena gone absorbed fully into the walls, her form imprinted in brass relief, skin fused permanently, eyes open in bas relief, steam exhaling from mouth in eternal breath. The log, integration complete, cycle eternal. Matteo, face a ruin of peels and blisters, whispered her name one last time before collapse. The pit below belched. Satisfied. Chapter 6. The Codex Awakens. Matteo woke in the burns unit of Policlinico Gemelli at 3:17 p.m. on October 19th, the room's fluorescent lights humming like distant bees, the air thick with the metallic tang of antiseptic and the faint, underlying sweetness of myrrh that no amount of ventilation could purge. His face was a landscape of gauze and salve, skin grafted from his thigh in hurried patches that itched with phantom fire, every breath pulling at sutures that felt like barbed wire woven through muscle. The heart monitor beeped steady, 72 BPM, but for 3 minutes and 33 seconds the night before, it had flatlined, a straight green line that the nurses whispered about in the corridor. Crossing themselves when they thought he couldn't hear, Elena sat beside him. Not in the flesh, her body was gone, integrated into Il Purificatore's brass, but in presence, perched on the vinyl chair with the poise of their wedding day, veil crisp, orange blossoms still tucked behind one ear. She smiled the way she had in Santa Croce, eyes crinkling at the corners, and spoke in fluent medieval Latin, the cadence rolling like Gregorian chant. Matteo meus, codex evigilavit. My Matthew. The codex has awakened. He tried to sit up. IV lines tugged. Morphine dulled the edges, but not the terror. Elena, you're sanctificata, she finished, voice layered hers, but underscored by a deeper timbre, like two throats speaking in harmony. The steam was mercy. The pit was cradle. Bartolomeo and I, we are the margin now. She reached out. Her hand passed through his, leaving a chill that sank into bone, frostbite without cold, where her fingers brushed. The grafts blistered anew, skin bubbling gently, lifting in translucent domes that popped with soft puffs, releasing vapor scented of parchment and plague. The heart monitor spiked 120, 140 nurses rushing in. But Elena raised a finger, and they froze mid-step, eyes glazing as if caught in a dream. Matteo's wedding ring recovered from the chamber, melted into a twisted band lay on the bedside table. It moved, rolling on its edge like a coin, then liquefying into quicksilver that slithered across the formica, pooling into the shape of a key, the Voynich fragment, retrieved by hazmat in a lead-lined case, rested beside it. The page once inert, vellum now, bore Elena's scalded handprint in blood that refused to coagulate, the crimson fresh and glossy, veins pulsing faintly as if feeding the ink. The illustrations had shifted. The bizarre plants now bloomed with human faces. Elena's face multiplied, mouths open in silent O's, roots delving into the margin where new text appeared in her handwriting, ready ad me. Et ego redibo ad te. Return to me, and I will return to you. Cardinal Lamberto entered at dusk, one sleeve pinned where his arm had been, face gaunt but eyes sharp. He carried a folder stamped with the papal seal, wax still warm. The cycle was interrupted, he said quietly, voice papery but steady. Bartolomeo's binding fractured when the door opened. Elena, she's the bridge now. The codex wants completion. He laid blueprints on the bed, the Vatican catacombs, a warren beneath the basilica, with Il Purificatore marked as a node. A deeper chamber circular, 10 meters across, was labeled Camera Purification as Maxima, a larger autoclave built in 1612 under Innocent X, used for heretical volumes and their authors. The door, brass, etched non aperius, do not open. A margin note in Elena's hand impossible, but there read, aperi, et vive, open and live. Matteo discharged himself at midnight, against every protocol, Burns weeping through bandages that smelled of frankincense and rot. Lamberto provided a key, the melted ring reforged, and a map inked on human skin that had tanned supple, the donor unknown. They descended through a service hatch behind the Sistine Chapel, past frescoes where tourists never looked, into corridors that narrowed like veins, air growing warmer, humid, carrying the breath of steam long dormant. The chamber door loomed taller than St. Peter's bronze, wheellock massive as a millstone. Frost rimed the edges, but the center glowed cherry red, pulsing. Elena's voice echoed from within, soft, intimate. Matteo, the wedding vow, in sickness and in health. He spun the wheel. It turned easily, too easily, gears meshing with a lover's sigh. The door opened inward on silent hinges. Inside, a cathedral of brass and bone. Pipes the thickness of thighs ran floor to ceiling. Valves weeping sanctified water that steamed on contact with air. In the center, on a dais of fused skeletons, the 47 from the pit. Ribs interlocked like wicker lay the full Voynich manuscript. Pages thick as a missal. Illustrations writhing, plants with Elena's face, roots delving into skulls that still held desiccated brains, eyes blinking slowly. Elena stood beside it, whole again, skin porcelain but veined with brass, eyes compound facets, reflecting infinite Matteos. Her wedding dress, once white lace, was now woven from degloved skins chiaras, Domenicos, the guards stitched with Voynich thread, seams pulsing. She extended a hand, the palm bore the autoclave's wheel imprint, burned deep. Join the margin, she whispered, voice a choir. The codex is lonely. Matteo stepped forward, the door sealed behind him with a gentle clack. Steam rose gentle at first, warm as a bath, scented of orange blossoms and myrrh. His burns soothed, grafts dissolving painlessly, skin sloughing in sheets that floated upward like ash, revealing new flesh beneath smooth, brass-infused, veins glowing amber. The pain was ecstasy, dissolution as a reunion. Lamberto watched from the threshold, too late to enter, too faithful to flee as the chamber filled with light, steam condensing into Latin script on the walls, consortes aeternum, partners forever. Upstairs, in Gemelli, Elena's heart monitor flatlined again, 3 minutes, 33 seconds, when it beeped back. The rhythm was different, 2 hearts, synchronized. The melted ring, left on the bedside table, cooled into a perfect circle in the catacombs. The larger cycle began. Chapter 7, Descent into the Plague Pit. Matteo left Gemelli at 2:11 a.m. On October 20th, slipping past the night nurse, whose eyes glazed the moment he whispered Elena's name, 3 syllables that carried the weight of a papal bull. The melted ring key hung around his neck on a chain of sterilized gauze. It pulsed warm against his sternum, syncing with the dual heartbeat the monitors had recorded. Burns still wept beneath his shirt, but the pain had transmuted into a low, constant thrum, like standing too close to a cathedral organ during the Dies Irae. He moved through Rome's sleeping streets in a borrowed cassock 2 sizes too large, the fabric brushing raw grafts that itched with the promise of something growing beneath. Lamberto waited at the service hatch behind the Sistine Chapel, one sleeve pinned, the other clutching a lantern fed by consecrated oil. The cardinal's remaining hand trembled, but his voice was steady. The map is skin. The path is memory. Follow the steam. He pressed the tanned sheet supple, still faintly warm, into Matteo's palm. Veins of ink mapped the descent from the Restoration Vault through the ossuary of Sixtus V, past the flooded hypogeum where early Christians had hidden, down to the plague pits sealed in 1572. A single line in Elena's handwriting curled along the margin: Descenda et invenimi, descend, and you will find me. They entered at 2:47 a.m., the hatch sighed shut behind them, sealing with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The air immediately thickened, humid, mineral, laced with myrrh and the sweeter rot of old fat. Lantern light revealed walls slick with condensation that dripped in slow, deliberate drops, each impact echoing like a heartbeat in a coffin. The corridor narrowed to shoulder width, forcing them single file, Matteo's cassock snagged on protrusions that turned out to be finger bones mortared into the stone, knuckles polished smooth by centuries of passage. At the first junction, the floor slanted sharply, water knee-deep, warm as blood lapped at their calves. It wasn't water. The surface shimmered with an oil-slick iridescence, and beneath floated fragments: a child's rib cage, a papal tiara corroded to lace, pages of illuminated manuscripts, swollen and illegible, Lamberto's lantern reflected in the liquid, doubling the light into ghostly twins. Matteo tasted iron on his tongue. The air was saturated with aerosolized hemoglobin. They reached the ossuary gate at 3:03 a.m., a portcullis of tibias and femurs lashed with sinew rope. The gate swung inward at Matteo's touch, bones creaking like old ship timbers. Beyond lay the hypogeum, a cavernous chamber where early Christian frescoes peeled from the ceiling in long curls, revealing older paintings beneath pagan symbols, a bull-headed figure devouring a child, eyes scratched out with frantic nails. The floor here was dry, dusted with bone meal that puffed up in clouds with each footfall, coating their lungs in the taste of the dead. A staircase spiraled down, carved from a single block of tufa. Each step was etched with a name and a date: victims of the 1572 outbreak, their final signatures. Matteo's lantern illuminated Elena's addition halfway down: Elena Rossi Bellini. 12th, Ottobre 2024, the letters fresh, carved deep enough to bleed dust. The plague pit opened at 3:33 a.m. It was not a pit, but a cathedral inverted, vaulted ceiling lost in darkness, floor a lake of black water that reflected no light. In the center rose Al Purificatore's twin, a larger autoclave, 5 meters tall, brass-dulled to verdigris, door sealed with a wheel the size of a wagon wheel, pipes the thickness of pythons coiled from its base into the water, valves weeping steam that condensed into fat droplets on the surface, each pop releasing a sigh that sounded almost human. Elena waited on the threshold. She was naked, save for the wedding veil, now woven from Voynich pages illustrations, writhing across the lace, plants blooming and withering in real time. Her skin was porcelain, but translucent beneath. Brass arteries glowed like molten gold, pulsing in sync with Matteo's ring, where her navel had been. The melted wheel imprint spun slowly, a miniature autoclave door. She extended both hands. The left was normal, the right elongated, Fingers fused into a single brass talon. "Matteo," she said, voice a duet hers and Bartolomeo's, centuries apart yet harmonized. "The codex is incomplete. One more page." Lamberto stepped forward, lantern raised. Light fell on the dais behind Elena. The 47 skeletons, arranged in a spiral, ribs interlocked to form a throne. At its center lay the full Voynich manuscript, open to a blank page. The inkwell beside it was a human skull, brimful with blood that refused to clot. Matteo's feet moved without consent, drawn by the ring's heat. The water rose to his waist, warm and viscous, clinging like amniotic fluid. Bones brushed his legs' femurs, vertebrae. A tiny hand that grasped his ankle before dissolving into silt. Elena's talon hand cupped his cheek. The metal was fever hot. Branding the autoclave wheel into his skin, pain bloomed, exquisite, familiar. "Write with me," she whispered. The blank page fluttered. Ink rose from the skull well in a ribbon, forming letters in midair. Matteo Bellini. Sa 20 Ottobre 2024. The ribbon wrapped his wrist. Pulling him closer, Lamberto lunged, lantern swinging, but the flame guttered out as if drowned in the sudden dark. Matteo felt the cardinal's remaining hand on his shoulder, then nothing, a soft crunch, like eggshell underfoot. When emergency phosphorescence from the pipes kicked in sickly green, Lamberto was gone, only his empty sleeve floating on the water, pinned by a single brass valve. Elena guided Matteo's hand to the page. The ring key melted fully, flowing into the ink, turning it molten gold. Together they wrote not with pen, but with blood and steam. Each letter seared the vellum, smoke curling into shapes. Their wedding in Santa Croce, the orange blossoms, the first clack of Il Purificatore. The page accepted it all. Illustrations blooming around the text Matteo's face on a sunflower. Elena's on a root that burrowed into his chest. The larger autoclave hummed to life behind them, wheel spinning on its own. Steam filled the chamber, gentle at first, then building to a roar. Matteo felt his grafts dissolve, skin sloughing painlessly, revealing the brass beneath his own arteries rerouting, valves clicking into place. The pain was transcendence. Elena's veil enveloped him, pages rustling like wings. The last thing he saw was the completed page, their names intertwined. The margin note in both handwritings, consummatum est. It is finished. The door sealed with a lover's sigh. Above, in the basilica, the great bells tolled 4 a.m. No one heard the second clack from below. In Gemelli, the heart monitor settled into a single, perfect rhythm. The melted ring, now a perfect circle on the bedside table, cooled to room temperature, and in the plague pit. The codex closed. Chapter 8. The Eternal Cycle. The clack that sealed Matteo and Elena inside the larger autoclave reverberated not through the air, but through the very fabric of their merging souls. A sound so intimate and final, it felt like the snap of a lover's neck under the weight of eternal embrace devouring. Yes, but with the tenderness of a kiss that never ends. Lips fusing until breath becomes shared poison. The brass walls, forged in 1612 under Pope Innocent X's secretive decree, a historical footnote often buried in Vatican annals, where scholars still debate if the chamber was truly for purifying heretical texts or something far more visceral, like dissolving the bodies of those who dared question papal infallibility. contracted with a peristaltic groan, pipes undulating like veins in a colossal, awakening beast. Steam sanctified, scalding at 200 C squeezed from hidden nozzles, infiltrating their pores with the insidious gentleness of a fog rolling edge of the Tiber at dawn, but laced with the rot of orange blossoms left too long in a bridal bouquet, wilting into a sickly perfume that cloyed the throat and stirred memories Matteo wished buried, Elena's laughter on their honeymoon walk through the Boboli gardens, now twisted into a gurgle, as if the flowers themselves had choked on plague water from the 1572 pit below St. Peter's, where 47 souls had been interred alive. Their final breaths mythologized in whispers among archivists as the choir of the condemned. Matteo's first coherent sensation was not pain, though pain was there. A baseline throb like standing too close to the basilica's great organ during a midnight requiem, but a profound, gut-wrenching recognition. The emotional equivalent of staring into a mirror that reflects not your face, but every unspoken betrayal of the heart. This was the marriage bed their vows had unwittingly consecrated, consummated not in silk sheets, but in vapor and verdigris rust, where in sickness and in health morphed into a literal alchemy, sickness as the eternal fever of fusion, health as the cold click of brass valves replacing his faltering pulse, his flesh sloughing in diaphanous layers that floated upward like bridal veils caught in an updraft, adhering to the chamber's etched runes, exorcismus to turning ancient Latin into a script of his own unraveling. The horror gnawed from within, love, that purest human fire, reduced to this cannibalistic forge, where Elena's touch was both salvation and vivisection. Her fingers, now elongated into brass-tipped talons, joints reversing with wet pops of ligament, tracing the contours of his sternum, nails sinking just deep enough to draw beads of blood that didn't run but vaporized, rising to mingle with the steam in crimson wisps that spelled fleeting memories, the way her hand had trembled during their exchange of rings in Santa Croce, a moment of pure, untainted joy now replayed in agonizing slow motion, each heartbeat echoing Semper Fidelis as a curse, the gold band melting into his skin to form a wheel that spun eternally, grinding his identity to powder. Elena's compound eyes, thousands of Voynich facets, each a minuscule prison reflecting a Matteo in mid-scream. His face distorted across infinite regressions, like a funhouse gallery of the damned locked onto his, with the ravenous gleam of a widow spider sensing the final quiver of her mate. "Feel me inside you," she hissed, the words not spoken but inhaled, her breath a wet, plague-rattled chorus that vibrated through his molars like a dentist's drill burrowing toward the nerve. Elena's bridal lilt, soft as Tuscan olive groves at dusk, overlaid with Bartolomeo's 16th century gurgle, a sound like lungs filling with black bile during the 1572 outbreak, debated by historians as either divine judgment or papal cover-up for a failed exorcism and the 47 victims' death rattle harmony, a subterranean choir rising from the pit-like fog from a mass grave, all layered into a symphony that bypassed his ears to resonate directly in his brainstem. The word inside burrowed deeper than any root, amplifying the M-H violation, no orifice spared, steam jetting into his ear canals to boil cerebrospinal fluid into a frothy broth that bubbled up his sinuses. nostrils clogging with myrrh mucus, hardening into amber plugs that trapped nascent screams like flies in prehistoric resin, his mouth flooding with orange blossom bile fermented to septic vinegar. Tasting of their first kiss under Florence's Ponte Vecchio, now gone rancid, the sweetness curdled by the knowledge that this was intimacy at its most grotesque total penetration, body and soul, where her essence infiltrated his every capillary, rewriting his blood into a script of shared damnation. The codex on the skeletal throne, those 47 interlocked ribs, forming a cradle of calcified despair, each vertebra shifting with residual twitches as if the victim still dreamed of escape, opened its maw with a leathery creak, pages parting like the jaws of a yawning abyss. The final vellum was no longer inert. It was them, their fused epidermis stretched drum-tight over the ribcage frame, nerves splayed like live wires in a thunderstorm, twitching erratically to inscribe fresh marginalia with every involuntary spasm. Amavi te, et nunc devoror a te. I loved you, and now I devour you in return. Matteo watched, transfixed in paralyzed revulsion, as his own abdominal skin lifted in a single, translucent sheet peeling from the dermis with the slow, inexorable tug of wet silk separating from wound floating upward on thermals of superheated vapor to slap against the page with a resonant smack that echoed like a guillotine's kiss, adhering instantly as severed nerves reconnected across the gulf, his pain receptors firing in the codex's fibrous weave, while her phantom pleasure centers sparked wildfires in his hollowing chest. The sensation defied language, an unbearable ecstasy laced with the razor edge of horror, every peal an orgasm of agony that arched his spine, each adhesion a psychic rape of identity, his innermost thoughts inked in real time as the illustrations bloomed with ghastly vitality, Matteo's face etched on a sunflower's core, petals peeling back not to reveal seeds, but screaming teeth gnashing at the air, Elena's visage on a subterranean root that burrowed through his sternum with thorny deliberation, flowering in his pericardium with barbs that punctured ventricles in rhythmic stabs, blood jetting in pressurized arcs that traced semper fidelis on the chamber walls before evaporating into Latin vapor, the letters lingering as accusatory ghosts. The emotional gut punch landed like a papal indictment, surgical and unrelenting. Grief for the archaeologist he had been, the man who unearthed truths in sunlit Etruscan dirt, brushing dust from bones that whispered forgotten histories, manifested as a physical chasm in his hollowing thorax. Ribs spreading with a series of cracks like green wood splintering in a hearth fire, exposing the brass pump that had usurped his heart, valves clicking with mechanical indifference to the chaos they wrought, each tick a reminder of time's betrayal, terror of eternity crystallized in the chamber's quiet lulls between steam surges, those breathless pauses where the soul-crushing isolation of being known completely clawed at his sanity, every secret excavated and displayed like relics in a macabre museum, his fleeting doubts during Elena's late-night archival vigils, the unspoken fear that her devotion to the Vatican's shadows would one day eclipse their light, the guilty thrill of solitude in their Trastevere apartment, now etched as margin notes for the pit's eternal tribunal to judge. flaws magnified in the codex's infinite fractal regression, where each reflection birthed a smaller damnation, ad nauseum. Love, that fragile human fire, reduced to autopsy under sanctified scalpel, dissected alive on the vellum altar. Every chamber of the heart flayed open to reveal not passion, but the writhing parasites of possession. The ghastly certainty that union meant not completion, but consumption. His essence siphoned drop by drop into her brass-veined abyss. Elena's talon fingers fused into a single, articulated claw, joints reversing with wet pops of ligament, shredding like overtaxed harp strings, carved Fidelis into his reforming cheek. Brass nails sinking to the zygomatic bone with a grind that vibrated through his jaw like gravel in a millstone, letters filling with molten gold from the melted ring. The metal searing not just flesh, but memory, each stroke igniting flashbacks, the Florence train platform where he had kissed her goodbye. Orange blossoms in her hair, now replayed as wilting petals dripping ichor. The vow exchanged under Santa Croce's arches, twisting into a noose of fidelity that strangled free will. The kiss that followed was cannibalistic in its veracity, lips welding in a superheated fusion that bubbled the subcutaneous fat beneath, tongues dissolving into a shared, viscous slurry that slithered down throats like communion wine gone septic, tasting of honeymoon oranges fermented to acrid vinegar in the pit's acidic broth. Myrrh curdled to throat-clogging pus, blood thick as sacramental gruel laced with the metallic tang of rusted vows. Emotions flooded in septic, unrelenting waves, love corrupted into ravenous hunger that gnawed at the edges of self. Joy twisted into the ghastly certainty of perpetual consumption. No climax to the build-up. No release from the pressure cooker of their merged soul. Every dual heartbeat a thump, thump of mutual devouring. The rhythm syncing with the chamber's pipes in a dirge that echoed the 47 victims' final gasps. Debated by Vatican historians as either plague-induced delirium or the birth cries of something unholy. Time fractured into merciless 333 increments, the cycle timer glowing like the accusatory eyes of inquisitors in a shadowed consistory, numbers resetting with mechanical inevitability that mocked human frailty. Steam cycles escalated in sadistic progression, beginning with gentle reminiscences, vows materializing in vaporous script. Elena's silhouette dancing in the mist like their first waltz under Roman stars, building to flaying roars that stripped layers both emotional and physical. Matteo's surgical grafts from the failed rescue sloughing in wet, resonant plops that splashed against the bone floor, where maggots hatched from the pit's primordial ooze swarmed the fallen flesh, burrowing with voracious crunches that mirrored love's insidious erosion of autonomy. Larvae pupating into brass-winged horrors that fluttered upward to nest in his softening lungs. The 47 chorus swelled to a deafening crescendo, mothers' wails fracturing into shards of shattered lullabies, scribes' pleas for erased heresies, dissolving into ink blots of madness. Lamberto's shattered faith manifesting as a spectral wave. I opened the door. Devour me instead. Spare the innocent crashing over Matteo like a tsunami of collective despair. Each victim's unrequited longing threading through his nerves like barbed wire, amplifying his own isolation into a howling void where eternity yawned not as peace, but as endless, gnawing hunger. Elena's veil once crisp lace from their wedding, now a shroud woven from Voynich pages, rustling like flayed skin caught in a graveyard gale, enveloped him fully. Illustrations animating to wrap his form in thorny embrace, roots burrowing through his corneas with deliberate slowness, flowering behind retinas in visions of infinite regressions, smaller Mateos and Elenas merging in fractal chambers ad infinitum, each loop a fresh betrayal of self. His lungs transmuted into brass sieves, alveoli collapsing under pressure to filter steam into breath. Each inhale a gasp of her invasive essence memories, of her scent, now laced with plague sweat exhale, a ragged surrender that fogged the walls with semper fidelis in condensing vapor, the letters dripping like accusatory sweat, above ground. The Vatican stirred into pandemonium at 4:33 a.m. Security feeds glitching in a cascade of static that resolved into steam tendrils seeping from grates beneath the high altar, condensing on Carrara marble to spell peccator rediat in letters that writhed like living veins, dripping ichor that corroded the stone into pitted scars resembling the codex's marginalia. Guards in crisp uniforms descended the service hatch in a phalanx of halberds and holy water. But the portal had fused seamless, brass flowing like arterial blood to block their path, the metal pulsing with an inner heat that blistered palms pressing against it. In the Gemelli ICU, Mateo's abandoned husk convulsed one final time heart monitor, exploding in a shower of glass shards that embedded in the walls to spell Devoramus. We devour, the fragments glinting like teeth in the sterile light. Nurses fleeing as vapor seeped from the vents, carrying whispers of vows in Latin that no one dared translate. Deep in the chamber, the codex closed with a resonant thud that vibrated through the pit like the toll of Judgment Day. Pages thick with their fused dermis, now a single, quivering leaf. Illustrations complete in their grotesque harmony. A solitary plant with dual visages, Mateo and Elena. Faces locked in eternal scream-kiss roots entwined in an unbreakable knot. Blooming thorns that pierced the throne's ribs to draw fresh ink from the 47 skeletons, perpetuating the cycle. But the hum persisted, pressure building inexorably for the next unwary pilgrim, the steam rising through catacomb veins toward the surface, seeking new margins to inscribe. The bells of St. Peter's tolled 3:33 a.m., a dirge that masked the subterranean clacknot ending, but beckoning. Your turn, listener. The vapor coils in the ducts of your own hidden chambers. It knows your name, your secrets, the vows you've whispered in the dark. Can you feel the margin writing itself in your veins, one blister at a time? What part of you, your heart's doubt, your love's hidden rot, would you feed the codex to escape its hunger? Drop your confession in the comments below. Maybe sharing will purge it, or invite it closer. And if this devouring fusion has crawled under your skin, hit subscribe. The next door in the Vatican shadows creaks open soon, and you won't want to face it alone.